Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and this is the Galileo Garden. For 5 years, I and an amazing team of volunteers and supporters have turned what used to be tennis courts into a school garden. This hat has been with me the whole time, and today I'm retiring, and this hat is being retired. Join me as I share with you the story of Galileo, an amazing school garden. So why is the Galileo Garden amazing? Well, that's not my word. That's the word that hundreds of visitors have used to describe it. What makes this garden so special are the many, many stories that have taken place in just the few years that we've been here. Let me share some of my favorite with you. Within a few weeks of beginning this garden program, we had students starting seeds in classrooms. Throughout the school, all grade levels, many different seeds. We didn't have many to choose from at the time, just a few donated packets, but we were growing plants to go here in the greenhouse. And the students were doing the growing, and the students would do the transplanting. One day, we had a group of students, a class, come in. I showed them how to put plants into the ground right here. And this always chokes me up. We went through this group of students putting plants in the ground. And there were 3 boys standing in the back. You know who those kind of boys are. They don't want to participate. They don't want to be part of the group. All of the other kids put their seedlings in the ground. And those 3 boys were the last ones. I looked up at him and I said, "You're up." So they came here. The first boy dug the hole as I showed him, took the plant and put it in the ground. The second boy looked like he'd been doing it for years. Dug the hole, took it out of the flat, put it in the ground. He was a pro. The third boy knelt right here. Went to take the plant out of the ground, and he'd forgotten to dig the hole. When he went to put the plant down, he dropped it, and it just splattered on the ground. He was concerned, worried, afraid that he might be in trouble. I was about to step forward to say, "Let me show you again." When the second boy stepped forward, and he said, "Here, let me show you." Side by side, those 3 boys worked together to put a single seedling in the ground. And they looked up at me and almost in unison said, "Can we do more?" That, to me, is the essence of the Galileo Garden. That moment defined all the years. A youth who didn't want to participate in the beginning, but when exposed to a school garden, wanted to do more. This was the beginning of an amazing journey. When I started all those years ago, the only thing that was in this space was this 42-foot dome greenhouse and a few beds. It was just a barren lot waiting to reach its full potential. And I was there to help it along the journey. It's important to note that this entire garden receives no direct funding from the school or from the school district. Everything has been accomplished with the help of grants, donations, fundraisers, and a lot of volunteer support. The main outdoor garden began right here. This was nothing but bare dirt, and underneath it was layers of rock and gravel and compacted dirt that makes up the underlayment of tennis courts. And it was Leslie and Teelan and me with picks and shovels right here digging this section out to prepare the very first beds. It was hard in those first few weeks digging into this dirt. We were hot, we were sweaty, and then Papa John's Pizza showed up. The management team from the local stores, 13 managers showed up with shovels and picks and wheelbarrows, and they dug out this space. This was the first garden bed. And when Papa John's left, they left behind the tools. All of these raised beds were the next phase of growth within the Galileo Garden. All this lumber was donated by a local construction company, and the beds were built by students at one of our local high schools. All that time, all that effort was donated, and those students delivered these beds and helped me put them in place. They were empty at the time, but they were here, and it started us on the path of a lot of growing. And after Papa John so graciously left behind all of those tools, it enabled many more volunteers and many more helpers to dig and amend the soil and turn this into our first outdoor in-ground bed. And it became our pumpkin patch. And it was a very special pumpkin patch. In the fall of that first year, we had a harvest festival. The only thing we had to present was our pumpkin patch. But our drama club had been practicing the play. It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. And they performed it here. We had a few hundred parents, community members, teachers come for that harvest festival. And to watch the kids performing is the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. They gave donations, we sold our pumpkins, we had contests, and we earned enough money to move forward, to buy the first 2 currant bushes, to buy seeds, to buy pots, to move this garden forward. In that first year, we didn't grow a lot. The beds were here, but there was no soil for the beds. So we relied on donations to gradually put soil in these beds. And as we had fundraisers over the next year, we were able to purchase what couldn't be donated. In the second year, we actually were able to fill most of these beds with plants. We grew over 1,400 pounds of produce in what used to be tennis courts. It was right next to this bed where another great story happened. We were growing carrots in this bed, and students were involved with harvesting the carrots. As has been the case throughout all of the harvest, the students are encouraged to eat anything that they harvest. And one of our girls pulled a carrot out of the ground looked at it and said, "I didn't know carrots came from the ground." And then another girl walked up and said, "Me neither." And she's chomping away at her carrot. And she said to her friend and to me, "I hate carrots," as she took another bite. "But I'll eat this forever." We had a lot of volunteers working very hard to dig out space for the fruit trees. We're still doing it in this section right here. One volunteer, Tom, came 4, sometimes 5 days a week. He'd be here 3, sometimes 4 hours with a pick and a shovel, digging this rock, this clay, this compacted soil to give us a space to put plants in the ground. It was in this section that we grew our giant pumpkins, and we really took great pride in growing giant pumpkins. We tried to break 100 pounds, we got close a couple times, but we did grow some big pumpkins. Now, there's a quince tree, there's a honeyberry, there's gooseberry, there are apple trees. But it was the pumpkins that really gave us revenue and enthusiasm to get this garden going. The produce that we grew helped the garden grow. Food and Nutrition Services within the district purchased a portion of what we grew to use in the school garden and throughout the district. Some of what we grew, we sold at farmers markets. In those early days, the kids were actually harvesting, setting the prices, and selling what we had to grow at the local senior center. The seniors were able to benefit from the healthy harvest. Our kids were learning about business because essentially this was a small business farm, and we were earning money to keep the program going. It was in these beds that we were growing Swiss chard, and a group of students had harvested the chard along with many other things because we had a farmer's market that day. We were going up the street to the senior center, and the seniors were going to buy the produce from our students. We'd sold a lot that day at that market, but there was a lot of the chard left behind. And finally, one of the seniors stepped forward and asked what it was. And our students looked at her, and a couple of them weren't sure, but one boy said, "That's Swiss chard." And she, the senior, asked them, "Well, what does it taste like?" And though the students have eaten almost everything you can imagine in this garden, that small group of students had yet to try Swiss chard. So I stepped in, pulled out a piece of the chard, gave it to those students, and said, "Taste it. What do you think?" They decided between the 3 of them that it tasted like salty celery. The senior wasn't interested. She decided to pass. But the boy liked it. And we were selling this little bag of Swiss chard for $2. And he reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet. I could see there wasn't much money in the wallet. And he pulled out $2 to buy himself a bag of Swiss chard. And for the rest of that market and the walk home, he was breaking off little pieces of the Swiss chard and popping them in his mouth like M&Ms. And we're getting close to the school, and he stops on the sidewalk. I was walking behind, and he turned around and said, "Oh, I like the red chard way better than the yellow chard." And then turned around as though it was nothing and kept eating. I love having students come to the garden during harvest time because I get to show them things that they may never have heard of, in almost all cases never tried before. This is the corner of the first currant plants. We grow raspberries, we grow strawberries, we grow grapes, and we grow currants. Currants are a berry on a bush that many Americans are unfamiliar with, but our kids love them. I've had students, many students, who will walk past ripe strawberries, they'll walk past the ripe raspberries and come straight to the currants because they like the flavor so much. How many other schools have the ability to give students the opportunity to choose between strawberries, raspberries, and currants? The Boy Scouts have played an integral role in developing the Galileo Garden. We've had 7 potential Eagle Scouts, all who ended up becoming Eagle Scouts, do projects in the garden. This was the first one. Behind me is the sensory garden. At the time, it was just bare dirt, but a scout came in with a team. They rented a little Bobcat skid loader to excavate out. They knew how long it would take to dig with shovel and pick. They filled it back in with good amended soil. All this wood was left behind by them. The year before, we had had a devastating fire locally, the Black Forest fire. And this scout was able to get some of the wood from that fire, some of these trees that were fallen. The border to this garden, these benches, is a little homage to the citizens that lost their houses in the Black Forest fire. As the garden grew, we needed more places for students to sit when they would come out to the garden. These benches and those behind me were another Eagle Scout project that allowed 30 students at a time to come out in this outdoor classroom space for outdoor education in the garden. We had an Eagle Scout project making these bee houses, and another one that made all of these stepping stones. Another scout and his troop built this bat house and a number of bird houses that ring the fence around the garden. Another scout earned his eagle by putting these flagstones in place, putting these boulders in place, and creating a small classroom setting for small groups of students. It was in this bed that we were growing cucumbers. And it was getting towards the end of the season, and like most gardeners know, there's always that one cucumber that's been hiding underneath the leaves all summer long. And it's getting big and big and bigger. I had one of those cucumbers, and it was a big cucumber. And yellow, very old. And I left it there to see how big it would get. And then we had one of our final harvests. So I told the kids, harvest all of the cucumbers. And we weigh our harvest so I can tell you how many pounds that we grow each year. And as we were weighing the bags of cucumbers, I see this big yellow old cucumber in the bag. And so I pull it out and set it off to the side. And some of the kids are saying, why? Why are you pulling that cucumber out? And I explained to them that it's old, it'll be fibrous, sour, it's really past its prime and won't taste good. And the chorus of students saying, can we try it? Was almost deafening. So I broke the cucumber into chunks, cut the chunks into smaller pieces, and almost every one of those 24 students tasted a cucumber that I would never have eaten. And the proclamation was that they liked it. Contrary to what most parents think, Kids will eat almost anything if you make it interesting. On more than one occasion, I've mentioned that dandelions are edible, the entire plant. It's amazing to see students lined up to taste dandelion leaves or dandelion flowers. It's more amazing how many of them like dandelions and then go on to pull them out of the garden, making my weeding job a little bit easier and broadening their world a little bit more. It was during our third summer when we had a local community art organization, a nonprofit, come in and construct our outdoor classroom space and a gazebo over the period of a week. They had their own 24 volunteers along with my volunteers. We used grant money that we were awarded from the Whole Kids Foundation. A lot of people working hard. The youngest volunteer was 7 years old. The oldest volunteer was 82 years old. From all aspects of the community. Some of them, because of the nonprofit status of this organization and the work they were doing, were homeless. And they were told that if they did the work for a day, they'd have a meal later in the day. They came the first day for the meal, and many of them came back every other day in the week just to be part of what we were doing. In the last 2 years, we've harvested over 2,000 pounds of produce each year. At the beginning of the school year last year, every single cucumber in August and September that was served on our school salad bar came from this garden, every single one. We've grown tomatoes of 35, 40 different varieties. We've grown cucumbers and peppers and squash. We grow herbs. We have onions. Anything you would expect in a typical home garden, we're growing here. And our students have the opportunity to taste whenever they're in the garden. One of our other big supporters was Ranch Foods Direct. And one year with them, we hosted Poopapalooza. Now, Ranch Foods gets their beef from their ranches in Kansas. And as you might guess, on a cattle ranch, there's a lot of manure. And Poopapalooza was basically an opportunity for the community to come and get cow manure. You could get as much manure as you wanted if you left a donation. And that donation went to Colorado Springs Utilities program to help some of our less privileged citizens pay their utility bills. And we had a big mound. We actually had 2 big mounds of manure stacked in the field, and lots of people touring the garden that day. They didn't give away all the manure. What was left behind, we got to keep. In addition to that, Ranch Foods gave us hundreds of pounds of biochar, which is another wonderful soil amendment. And we've used that biochar to enhance our soil and many of the plants that we're growing. After years of attempting to dig into this hard pan dirt and create these beautiful spaces, I decided instead to build up, to create soil in mounds with leaves and twigs and the weeds that we pull on a daily basis. I put the call out for donations of bagged leaves. The response was overwhelming, and I received over 300 bags of leaves, grass, and twigs that enabled us to move into the next phase of gardening, a mound garden where we've created our own soil from other people's waste. I've always thought the Galileo Garden was a special place, even when none of these beds were here, long before any of these plants were here. It was just bare dirt. that used to be tennis courts. But I could see what it could become, and I'm glad that I was able to make it an amazing space and offer stories and experiences for so many people. This has been an amazing part of my life, and I like to think that this has been an amazing part of the lives of many others. I and my hat, with its many holes and sweat stains, are retiring. We're moving to a garden and to travels of other lands and other gardens, and I'll be sharing those in videos to come. But for now, it's time to say goodbye from me to the Galileo Garden. But I hope I've given you the opportunity to say hello to the Galileo Garden, because I hope this garden is here for many years to come. And it's the support of the volunteers, the community, and maybe even a viewer like you that will help keep this school garden and many other school gardens successful. If you're not involved, consider getting involved. If you know of a school garden, consider volunteering. We always need volunteers. Thank you for your time. I'm like the old soldier at this point. I'm just going to fade away. To this garden, to many other gardens, and to the memories of Galileo, an amazing school garden.